Though back to Canberra Airport, we've just seen the plane that Julian Assange, we think he's on anyway, coming into land there at Canberra Airport. His long 14-year wait for freedom has already happened because he was released from that US court a little bit earlier on. But now he has flown to Canberra, where it's expected he will be reunited with his father very shortly, of course. Well, let's cross to our correspondent, Adam Hancock, who can join us now from Sydney. I mean, Adam, it really is a monumental moment, this, isn't it? Not just for Julian Assange, but for all of his supporters right around the world who've waited for this moment as well.
Absolutely. This is the moment they have been dreaming of for a long time. Julian Assange returning to his native Australia as a free man. It's been a very long process. It's been a very long few days, in all honesty, for Julian Assange. He left the United Kingdom on Monday, where he'd been in Belmarsh high security prison in London. He took a journey all the way across the world, stopping in Bangkok before going out to a remote Pacific island, which is still classified as US territory. He was in a court there this morning where his plea deal was formalized. The judge said that he can leave as a free man. And then he headed on to here in Australia. And as we can see from these live pictures, that is where he is arriving right now in Canberra. His wife is waiting for him, as is his father as well. They've both been speaking today about how excited they are to be reunited with Julian Assange, who is finally returning to Australia.
Yeah, I noticed that comment from Stella Assange, his wife, even yesterday, saying she was elated by the news, obviously, over the last 24 hours. You talked about a timeline there, Ad. I mean, that's the timeline of the last 24 hours. But it's incredible. I just printed out a timeline of where this story comes from when Julian Assange first founded WikiLeaks in Australia. That was right back in 2006, and it was in 2010 that WikiLeaks released that almost 500,000 documents relating to the US wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan. I mean, it just feels like that name of Julian Assange has been around for so long, and journalists and newspapers and organizations have been talking about his name and his story now for so many years.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why there has been this push in recent years to try and secure his freedom, because there is a sense, particularly here amongst some politicians, that this has been going on for too long. It's something that Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister, said in Parliament yesterday. He said, no matter what your opinions are of Julian Assange, and he does divide opinions here in Australia and around the world, there's just a feeling that enough is enough. This has been going on for too long, and work had to be done to secure his release. And it does seem very strange now that we are talking about him as a free man, given how long, as you mentioned, we have been discussing his case. There's been numerous legal battles. He's been fearing extradition to the United States for a long time. All those years holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, and then 5 years in the Belmarsh prison as well. So this really is a monumental moment for Mr. Assange, for his family, and for his supporters and those who have backed him since the very start.
How do you think he'll be welcomed there in Australia, Adam? Because it's a slightly difficult position, isn't it? I mean, he's obviously been accused by the Swedish authorities, by the US authorities of crimes, and found, in the end, the Swedish charges dropped. But at the same time, it's a difficult situation, particularly perhaps for some of those politicians in Australia who obviously don't want to offend anyone in the US, I suppose.
Yes, they're going to have to toe quite a fine line. And I spoke to one expert earlier on about this very subject, actually, and he said to me, this is not going to be an occasion where people are going to be high-fiving each other as he returns to the country. They know that they have a very delicate relationship with the United States. They've formed very close ties, particularly under the Albanese administration in recent years, signing a number of security pacts. And Anthony Albanese has a very close personal relationship with the US President Joe Biden. So I think it's going to be carefully managed. They are aware that, he has pleaded guilty today to that one charge of violating US espionage law. But obviously there are supporters of him here in Australia who are delighted that he is at home. We expect to see some very emotional scenes when he reunites with his family. We don't know where he's going to go next. There is a scheduled press conference by WikiLeaks happening here in Australia in the next few hours. We're not sure yet whether or not Mr. Assange will speak at that press conference. We're also due to hear as well from the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, again. But it's certainly a huge occasion for Mr. Assange's supporters, as the plane doors now just opening, and we wait to see who is leaving that plane on the airfield in Canberra.
Is there been any indication at all? I'll just wait to see if is that Julian Assange? I don't think it is. So yeah, it will be imminently anyway, we suspect. I mean, is there any indication either from WikiLeaks or from anything the family have said about what he may do next? I mean, could he even go back to the courts to challenge what happened to him or anything like that?
So his lawyer, who spoke outside the courtroom in Saipan today, did mention that the work of WikiLeaks will continue, and was indicating that Julian Assange isn't exactly going to go away. His brother has told media outlets as well that there is a plan to try and get a presidential pardon in the United States. He's currently banned from entering the US without special permission. So it does look like the work is going to continue for Mr. Assange, but there is a feeling that maybe for a while he will prefer to be out of the spotlight, spend some time with his family, and just get used to living a normal life. I know his wife was talking earlier about how this is going to be sensory overload, this experience for him, compared to how he has been living for the last 12 years or so, all of that time in solitary confinement, a lot of time holed up in an embassy as well. So to have this level of freedom again is going to be a big change to his lifestyle. But yeah, we await, really. That's the big question now. Now he is back in Australia. What is next for Julian Assange?
I mean, it is incredible, isn't it? Just on a human level, if you forget everything about what he may have been accused of and the legal processes, forget all that. Just imagine what it must be like to have spent the last 14 years under the not knowingness, I suppose, of knowing what's going to happen next. And then on the end of that, have the last 24 hours where so much has happened so quickly.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I was looking today at one of those timelines, actually, of this story, and the difference even in the appearance of Julian Assange from back in 2010, when a lot of this started, to the present day. There was obviously his appearance when he left the Ecuadorian embassy. I can't quite recall exactly what year that was, but he looked very different to when he went inside. And there were concerns that that lifestyle was taking a toll of him, really a lack of sunlight, a lack of socialization. And then when he went to the maximum security prison in Belmarsh in London, his wife reported that he was spending a lot of time in solitary confinement. So I know he has been able to keep in contact with some of his supporters and his close friends and family, but obviously it hasn't been that daily level of communication. So I think the last 24 hours, you saw the scenes outside the courthouse in Saipan. There was a media scrum, and even being in that kind of environment must have been quite shocking. And don't forget as well, he's travelled across the world. He left London on Monday. He's now in Australia. He's gone via Pacific Islands. So he must quite literally be all over the place right now. But I'm sure his main priority is just getting into the welcoming arms of his family.
You know, there have been some ups for him, haven't he? Just looking at the timeline I've got in front of me, there was a moment in February 2016 when Assange himself claimed total vindication. That was as a UN working group on arbitrary detention found that he'd been unlawfully detained, recommended that he be immediately freed and given compensation. Britain at that time, where he was in Belmarsh prison, called that finding frankly ridiculous. I mean, the ups and downs of what has happened to Julian Assange have been incredible. I was speaking to Benedict Pavio, our correspondent in London, just several times over the last few months, as it was not known at that stage whether there was going to be some deal between the UK and the US authorities to extradite him, to not extradite him. Just that sort of roller coaster, I suppose, of emotions that have gone on and on and on over the last few months. And let's not forget, all the way back to 2006.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's a real story of just complete highs and lows over the course of that 14 years. There's been moments when things have looked quite positive for him, and there's been moments when things have looked very difficult for him. And certainly there's been moments when it looks like just a solution wouldn't be found to this saga. So it's come really as a surprise that in the last few days, all of this has happened. I know that the lawmakers here in Australia are trying to stress really that this isn't an overnight process. This has been going on for a long time, and particularly in the last 2 years since Anthony Albanese took office, the efforts have really stepped up to try and secure his release. But I think with that level of stress for that for that length of time, the highs and the lows of all of the legal ups and downs, it certainly has been an unbelievable story. And I asked someone today whether or not they think this will be the end of the saga, and they said to some degree it definitely will, because he is now a free man and he's returned to Australia. But really, the story of Julian Assange has been so dramatic that they don't think it will just end immediately today with his return to his home country.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about being a free man. I mean, you can't quite imagine him, wandering down to the corner shop to buy a pint of milk tomorrow morning. I mean, it's going to be an incredible time for him to readjust. And of course, there could be other things that happen in the future which could affect not necessarily his freedom again, but his reputation, I suppose, is the word once again.
Yes, absolutely. It's a big questions now about the kind of work that he will continue to do, the kind of efforts that he will put in continuing with his organisation, WikiLeaks. Will he give interviews to the media? Somebody that I was speaking to earlier, a professor here in Australia, was saying that they wouldn't blame him if he didn't want to sort of put himself in the spotlight and give those interviews. But we are awaiting a press conference in around about an hour's time here in Australia. They're going to be holding a press conference, WikiLeaks, at a hotel in Canberra, and it will be very interesting to hear the tone of that press conference, what exactly is announced, and whether or not Julian Assange himself will speak to the media. I think the door has been down off the plane for quite some time now. We have no sighting yet of Mr. Assange. I presume just last-minute preparations are ongoing. I know that he has flown across the world with Kevin Rudd, the former Australian Prime Minister, who's now Australia's ambassador to the US. There's been a number of high-ranking Australian officials travelling with him, showing really the efforts that Australia have gone to secure the release of Mr. Assange over the last few years, and how delicate this balance has been.
Yeah, if you're just tuning in to us here at France 24, you're watching The World Today, just to let you know that we're continuing to focus, as you can see from the screen, on that plane there carrying Julian Assange, which has left US territory and just landed around about 10 minutes or so ago, 15 minutes ago now, at Canberra Airport. Julian Assange back on Australian soil, or he certainly will be once he's come down those stairs that we're expecting to happen imminently. Let's talk a bit about Sweden's role in this as well, because let's not forget the first time that Julian Assange really came against his legal troubles was Swedish prosecutors. It was back in 2010 that they issued an arrest warrant for Julian Assange based on what was at the time just one woman's allegation of rape and another allegation of molestation. The warrant was withdrawn shortly afterwards, and Assange denied those allegations. But then later on, they reopened the rape investigation, and it wasn't until quite a long time later that all those allegations were eventually dropped. That was not until November of 2019, which is obviously only just a few years ago. I mean, all of that went on for well over 10 years, or almost 10 years, that Julian Assange was living under those allegations.
Yeah, those allegations certainly were hanging over him for a long time. I think that definitely had an impact on public opinion of Mr. Assange as well, and added really to the complexity of the case, obviously with him seeking refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in London all those years ago. And also, I think, just for the confusion for the public trying to keep a grasp on this story as well, with so many different allegations against Mr. Assange over the years, so many different legal battles, hearings as well. It feels like as a reporter, I've been reporting on this for a long time. So I just want to bring in as well, we've had some reaction from Julian Assange's wife, Stella, who posted on social media just saying that she is elated, excited and exhausted. This was just before she was heading to the airport to meet Mr. Assange when he arrives here in Australia. And she also referenced the couple's two sons, who are aged 5 and 7. And it's worth bearing in mind that this is the first time that since they've been alive that Mr. Assange has been a free man and able to be there for them at home. He said the two children are very excited and are jumping around like two little balls. And we've had this kind of statement all day as well. Julian Assange's father earlier told the media here in Australia. I think he referenced that he was doing cartwheels around his house in anticipation of his son returning. So, strip away all the elements of this from a personal level for the family members involved in this. It's a huge moment and something that they just have been waiting for so long, and for it to finally happen, I think they were almost in a sense of shock that it's happened so quickly and in the manner that it has happened as well. This mad dash across the world, effectively going to the US territory out in the Pacific, and ensuring that the plea deal could be certified today, getting that judgment, getting through the final hurdle. I was watching a media report here last night in Australia, and they finished their report by referencing the fact that given the twists and turns, until he is back on Australian soil, nobody was taking any chances. I know some of the statements yesterday from politicians here, including the Prime Minister, were pretty tight-lipped. It was a sense of cautious optimism. Nobody wanted to put their foot in it, as it were, or say anything which could jeopardize this case at the final stage. So there has been this sort of impending story happening here over the last 24 hours when it became clear what was happening and that he was going to be heading to Australia. And it was only really the last few hours that we found out exactly where he was going to be arriving. And at one time, there had been some speculation yesterday that he may go to Sydney or Melbourne. We don't actually know his onward movements from Canberra as well. A lot remains unknown about what he will do in Australia, where he will go. He was born in Queensland, but I know as a youngster he moved around the country a lot. So it certainly is all about reintegrating himself into normal life, but also getting used to being back in Australia as well, a place that he's not been for at least 14 years.
Yeah, it's incredible. You talk about just getting his feet back on Australian soil. He's just a few metres away from it, but obviously taking his time to come out of that aeroplane on the tarmac there at Canberra. Hopefully we will see it at some point. We talked just a moment ago, Adam, about the role of Sweden. Perhaps we should talk also about the role of Britain as well. I mean, it was back in February 2011 that a district court ruled that Julian Assange should be extradited to Sweden. Another few key dates, January 21, a British judge ruling that Assange cannot be extradited to the US. Then, of course, we're seeing some people come down the steps now. We'll just keep watching those images to see if one of them is Julian Assange. Obviously, a lot of other people on that plane with him. Doesn't appear to be amongst them at the moment, but no sign that they're all sort of looking back up the staircase to see whether it will be him imminently. I mean, it's been a very difficult and complicated case. We talked about Sweden before. We talked about the US. For the UK as well, causing numerous problems. The number of times he came and spoke on that balcony at the Ecuador embassy, giving a very awkward and perhaps difficult image for some of the UK and the justice system there too.
Yeah, it's been a problem that the UK has wanted to be solved for a long time. Nobody was really happy with the situation, particularly when he was.
There he is. Just going to interrupt you, Adam, because there he is, Julian Assange, getting off that plane, shaking hands with the crew. I'll be quiet and just leave the sound to tell the story.
Lawyer. He's hugging Stella.
Oh, Stella there?
Yeah, he's hugging her now. Oh. He picked her up in the air. Kissed her on the cheek, kisses on the mouth. Yeah. Big kisses. Woo! Dad. Hugging his dad.
Kisses.
Yeah, hugging his dad.
Wow, amazing emotional moments there as Julian Assange stepped off that plane, greeted by his wife Stella, greeted by his father as well, and above all, being able to wave to the crowds, Adam, very briefly.
Yes, yes. Pictures that his supporters and his family, I'm sure, will watch many, many times on a loop in the future, because it's quite an incredible moment, really. Julian Assange back on home soil after that 14+ year legal battle. It's been a lot of ups and downs, as we've been discussing, but he has finally arrived in Canberra as a free man. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about what happens next to him, but I'm sure he's delighted to be home and reunited with his family.